very soul of the world. Across the ages, legends of bravery, sacrifice, and valor echo through the mountains and forests, carried on the whispers of time. Yet, buried within these stories, there is a forgotten chapter, one so crucial that its absence has shaped the fate of Middle-earth in ways that even the wisest could not foresee: the War of the Last Alliance. This war was not just another battle in the long, bitter struggle against the forces of darkness. It was a war that marked the last hope of the free peoples of Middle-earth. Its influence lingers in every shadow, every step taken by the heroes. We know Aragorn, Frodo, Gandalf, but its true story remains veiled. The history passed down to us has ignored the deeper, darker truths that lay at the heart of this conflict, truths that, had they been known, may have altered the very course of the world. In this tale, we seek to uncover the forgotten elements of the War of the Last Alliance, the hidden truths that history failed to tell. We journey into the shadows of time to reveal the alliances forged not only by light, but by desperation. The choices made not in the purest of ideals, but out of the very necessity of survival. We will step into the minds of those who fought and fell, whose names are whispered, whose stories were lost. We will confront the tragic consequences of decisions made on a battlefield far from home, and discover how the ripple effects of this war would haunt the land long after the last sword was drawn. What history forgot, we shall now remember. The second age of Middle-earth had begun its slow descent into darkness. Sauron, the Dark Lord, whose reach spread far across the lands, cast a shadow over the once thriving world. His power was like a creeping fog, subtle at first, but relentless. His influence had seeped into the hearts of men, and many of them bent the knee to him for fear or greed. His armies grew, fueled by the broken will of those who had once stood strong. For some, there was no resistance, only survival. But not all were so easily swayed. The elves of Lindon, led by Gil-galad, still held the light in their hearts, and the men of Númenor, under the leadership of Elendil, refused to bow before Sauron's dark reign. The last alliance was born from the dire need to resist Sauron's dominion. It was a union that no one had ever imagined would come to pass. The proud elves of Lindon and the men of Númenor, two peoples with vastly different histories, cultures, and distrust for one another, coming together to wage war against the growing power of the Dark Lord. The very nature of this alliance, born not of friendship, but necessity, was fraught with tension. The Númenorians, with their proud heritage, saw the elves as distant, too ethereal and removed from the mortal world. The elves, in turn, saw the Númenorians as reckless, driven too often by ambition and pride. Despite this, both knew that the cost of failure would be far too great. The Dark Lord's might was too overwhelming, his forces too numerous, and so, with heavy hearts, they came together two once great peoples, now reduced to an alliance born of desperation. They would march toward Mordor, where the Black Gate loomed in the distance, an ominous symbol of the Dark Lord's presence, and where the fate of Middle-earth would be decided. But even as the great alliance gathered, an undercurrent of distrust pulsed beneath their ranks. Whispers ran through the lines. The Númenóreans were known for their strength, for their great ships and their skill in battle, but their hearts were burdened with the corruption that had begun to fester in their kingdom. The elves, on the other hand, carried a wisdom and grace that could not be matched, but their detachment and immortal nature made them seem distant and aloof to the men who would fight beside them. The journey to Mordor was not simply a physical one. It was a journey through a labyrinth of conflicting emotions, ideologies, and unresolved tensions. The days were long, the nights cold and unforgiving. The armies marched on, step by weary step, pushing forward despite the weariness that threatened to overcome them. The sense of unity that had once propelled the alliance now felt frayed, as the soldiers of both races began to question the true purpose of the war. Was this truly a battle for freedom, or simply the last desperate stand of two peoples, unwilling to accept their impending defeat? As the Black Gate drew nearer, so did the realization of the true scope of the challenge. It was no longer just a matter of surviving Sauron's forces. It was a battle for the very soul of Middle-earth, for the land itself. The forces of darkness were not confined to just the armies that marched beneath the shadow of Sauron's banner. The true danger lay in what Sauron had already begun to corrupt, the hearts and minds of men. The alliances forged in shadow, the burdens carried by those who had already sacrificed so much, began to unravel. Each leader, Gil-galad, Elendil, and their sons fought to maintain their tenuous bond. But even the mightiest of them were haunted by the weight of the war. Would they be able to set aside their differences long enough to overcome the terror that awaited them beyond the Black Gate? Or would their fractured unity be their undoing? The march continued, silent and grim. Every step closer to Mordor brought not only the soldiers nearer to their final confrontation, but also closer to their deepest fears, their greatest doubts. And at the heart of this great gathering storm, there remained one undeniable truth. This was not a war for glory. It was not a war for honor. It was a war for survival, and for all the bravery and heroism that might be displayed on the field of battle. There would be no certainty, only a desperate hope that against the overwhelming darkness, the light of Middle-earth could endure. The march toward Mordor continued, each step a heavy thud against the broken earth, each footfall weighed down by the looming dread of the coming conflict. The last alliance, elves and men, trudged through lands that had already been touched by the darkness of Sauron, a land that bore the scars of years of war. The atmosphere was thick with unease, the air heavy been a union of strength and resolve had begun to unravel from within. The alliance, once forged in the fires of necessity, was now starting to crumble under the weight of its own distrust. Rumors floated on the winds, twisting through the ranks like the venom of a hidden serpent. Whispers of betrayal, of spies within their very midst, spread like wildfire. The Numenorians, proud as they were not above suspicion. Some believed their kingship, with its once glorious rule, now teetered on the edge of ruin. Had their desire for power driven them to acts of treachery? Or were they simply the victims of Sauron's insidious manipulations? The elves, too, were no strangers to suspicion. Their immortal grace, their ancient wisdom, was it enough to keep them from being tainted by Sauron's growing power? Or were their alliances, forged in light, starting to fade into shadows? Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves, walked with his mind clouded, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon, but his heart was not at ease. He had seen the darkness spread before, felt the weight of 1,000 years upon his shoulders, and yet this time it felt different. The corruption, the deceit, it was closer than ever. He felt the pull of distrust deep within the camp. He could see it in the faces of the soldiers as they exchanged quick glances, as they whispered to one another when they thought no one was listening. Elendil, proud son of Numenor, his sword still shining from the fires of their distant homeland, was no stranger to leadership or the weight of responsibility. His people had once ruled the seas, now shattered beneath the waves of Sauron's ambition. He, too, was torn by the subtle signs of disarray that had begun to plague the alliance. He knew there was a reason for their alliance, but he could not shake the fear that there was more at play here than simply the destruction of Sauron. The toll of their journey was taking its toll, not just on their bodies, but on their hearts. The men of Numenor, once proud and noble, had begun to grow weary of their elvish counterparts. They spoke less of unity and more of the cost of fighting in a war that had already spanned countless years. Was their sacrifice worth it? Was there truly an end to Sauron's malice, or had they merely been chasing a shadow? And then there was Isildur, the son of Elendil, whose fire was like that of his ancestors, burning bright but fragile. He fought alongside his father, but deep within his heart, there was a fire of his own, a desire to prove himself, to rise above the legends of his bloodline. He watched his father with his wisdom, his heavy heart, and began to question. How much longer could they march? Was there truly an end to this? Or had they already lost, and this was simply the last stand of a broken alliance, a broken world? The shadow of Sauron hung over them like a suffocating cloud. It was impossible to escape, no matter how far they traveled. It was everywhere, in the wind, in the crackling of the trees, in the silent whispers of the soldiers. The Dark Lord had a way of reaching into the hearts of men, finding their weaknesses, twisting their fears into something far darker. armies of Mordor, vast and terrible, loomed at the edges of their minds. And yet, what truly terrified them was not the armies, those they could fight. No, it was the unseen hand of Sauron, the influence he had over the hearts of men. This was not a battle simply against armies, but against the very soul of Middle-earth. It wasn't just the threat of Sauron's armies that unsettled them. It was the tension between the alliance itself. The soldiers, once united in purpose, began to grow weary. Their strength faltered under the weight of distrust. As the days wore on, the promise of victory, of triumph over darkness, seemed less and less certain. What was truly at stake in this war? Was it the survival of Middle-earth, or was it the survival of those who still believed in a world beyond the shadow? The question lingered, unanswered, and it gnawed at their hearts. Every campfire brought a new conversation, a new argument, a new whisper of a broken trust. The soldiers, despite their strength, despite their noble intent, were beginning to fracture under the pressure. There were those who began to look for a way out, to question the cause, to search for meaning beyond the orders of their leaders. They began to wonder, were they not simply pawns in Sauron's greater game, dancing to his tune without even realizing it? Were they not, in some small way, already lost to his influence? As the march continued, these thoughts only grew. What began as an alliance forged by necessity was now becoming a fragile, tenuous thread, one that threatened to snap at the slightest disturbance. The weight of their roles in this war began to settle in. Gil-galad, Elendil, and Isildur were not only leading their people into battle, they were leading them into an abyss. Each step they took toward Mordor was a step deeper into the unknown. And with every passing moment, they came closer to a revelation that would change the course of the war. The true cost of this war was not simply in lives lost. It was in the very hearts of those who fought it. The battle that loomed ahead would not only be fought on the field of Mordor, but within each soldier's soul, and in the darkest corners of their hearts, they began to realize that the shadow of Sauron was not only coming for Middle-earth, it was coming for them. The very essence of who they were, their courage, their resolve, their ideals, was being tested in ways they could never have imagined. The price of victory was becoming clearer, and it was a price few were prepared to pay. The forces of the last alliance, once united by purpose, now moved forward with the heavy realization that this war was not just a battle of armies, but a war for the very souls of those who fought it. The road ahead was not just one of peril, but of unraveling truths that would not only define the future of Middle-earth, but the very future of the Alliance itself. And in this growing darkness, the figures of Gil-galad, Elendil, and Isildur loomed larger than ever before, their choices set to determine not just the fate of the world, but the price they would pay for their roles in it. The battle for the Black Gate had been won. forces of the last alliance stood victorious, their banners stained with the blood of heroes, their hands drenched in the price of a world saved, yet one still teetering on the brink of destruction. The land that had been scarred by the war, a land now filled with the echoes of its fallen champions, felt the weight of a victory that had come at a staggering cost. Gil-galad, the immortal High King of the Elves, was no more. His light, which had shone brighter than the stars, was now extinguished forever. Alongside him fell Elendil, the proud son of Numenor, whose strength had once been the shield against the darkness. Their deaths marked the end of an era, a time of greatness for both elves and men. The world seemed to hold its breath as the ashes of their bodies mingled with the soil, their spirits bound forever to the land they had defended so fiercely. Yet, despite the fall of these great figures, the shadow of Sauron did not fade with them. His defeat had been a hollow one, for it was not his true form that had been shattered, but only his mortal guise. The One Ring, still in Isildur's grasp, carried with it a power that neither he nor his people fully understood. The ring's malevolent pull, its insidious whisper, had taken root in the heart of the young king, and his decision to keep it was the first thread in the unraveling of peace. In the immediate aftermath, Middle-earth was left in a strange, uneasy peace. The alliance that had once held together in the face of overwhelming darkness was now splintered. The forces of Numenor, despite their victory, felt a growing mistrust of the elves. Was it their arrogance that had led to the downfall of their kings? Or was it their unyielding, ancient ways that had kept them from fully understanding the peril of this war? The elves, too, began to question the men they had fought beside. How could they trust those who had been so quick to claim victory, yet so slow to understand the true cost of their triumph? As Isildur returned to the lands of Numenor, the whispers of the ring began to spread. The power it held was undeniable, yet its price was far steeper than anyone could imagine. Those who had fought alongside Isildur in the war began to wonder if they had been fooled. Was this truly the end of Sauron's threat, or was it simply the beginning of something darker? They looked at Isildur, and though he was their king, they saw in him the same lust for power that had been the undoing of their ancestors. But the ring was not the only thing that lingered in the wake of the battle. The land itself felt broken, wounded, as though it had borne witness to something far greater than mere war. The people, though victorious, were forever changed. Heroes had fallen, and with them, a sense of hope that could never be fully restored. The momentary peace they had earned was fragile, a veil thin enough to tear at the slightest disturbance. As the weeks passed, the political landscape of Middle-earth began to fracture. The once unified alliance had given way to distrust, to internal struggles that had long been simmering beneath the surface. The elves, with their long lives and wisdom, turned inward, seeking solace in their own kind, while the men of Numenor began to divide. Their once mighty kingdom, now crippled by the burden of an uncertain future. The unity they had fought so hard to create had crumbled in the wake of their victory, leaving only the remnants of a once great alliance. The true cost of the war was not the lives lost in battle, but the lives lost in the hearts of those who survived. The sacrifices made in the name of peace had not been enough to prevent the growing darkness that now stirred in the world. The question remained, had they truly defeated Sauron, or had they merely prolonged the inevitable? In the years that followed, the shadow of the ring continued to loom over Middle-earth. The consequences of Isildur's fateful decision began to unfold as the temptation of the ring grew ever stronger. The political fragmentation of Numenor mirrored the splintering of its people, each faction struggling to find a sense of unity in the wake of their hero's fall. As the ring's influence spread, so too did the divisions between elves and men. What had been a desperate, fragile alliance had now become a fractured world, one where the seeds of future wars had been sown. The land that had once known unity and strength now knew only isolation and division. The heroes who had fought so bravely in the last alliance were now memories, their names whispered in the wind, their deeds fading into the annals of time. And yet, even as the world turned its back on the legacy they had left behind, the ring continued to call. Its power, its corruption, was undeniable, and it would be centuries before Middle-earth would truly understand the cost of Isildur's decision. Centuries passed. The great battle for the soul of Middle-earth, the one that had been fought and won by the last alliance, was now little more than a shadow in the chronicles of history. The lands had healed, but the scars remained. The men of Numenor, their kingdom long gone, had scattered to the winds. The elves, too, had retreated into the shadows of their own past, leaving behind a world that no longer understood the weight of the sacrifices they had made. But the seeds planted in the aftermath of that war had begun to sprout. The fractures that had begun in the wake of the last alliance grew deeper, spreading like a slow infection through the very fabric of Middle-earth. The Númenóreans, once proud and powerful, were now reduced to broken kingdoms, their legacy fractured and scattered. And yet, their bloodline, their very ambition remained, echoing through the generations. Isildur's choice, his refusal to destroy the ring, reverberated through the ages. The lust for power, unchecked, would rise again. It would not be long before the shadow of Sauron began to stir once more. The kingdom of Gondor, founded by the heirs of Elendil and Isildur, would come to know the weight of their ancestors' mistakes. The fall of Númenor was not the end, but the beginning of something far darker, a darkness that would not fully reveal itself until the coming of a new age, one where the ring would again call to those who would seek to wield it. The true history of the last alliance was not one of simple victory. It was a tale of pride, of betrayal, of choices made in the face of overwhelming darkness. The consequences of those choices were far greater than anyone could have known. The ring and the temptation it offered had never truly been defeated. It had only waited patiently for the right moment to return. And so, the great struggle that had begun in the shadows of the last alliance continued to echo through the ages. The fractured legacy of Numenor, the lust for power, and the corruption of the ring were not mere footnotes in history. They were the very foundation upon which the next great conflict would be built. And when that time came, the people of Middle-earth would again be forced to face the choices of their ancestors. In the end, as the story of the last alliance fades into the past, the narrator reflects on the deep, unbroken line of conflict that runs through the heart of Middle-earth. The battle, though won, was never truly over. The seeds of darkness that had been sown long ago continue to grow, and the light of hope, though it flickers and wanes, can never be fully extinguished. The struggle against evil, against the temptation of power, and the battle for the soul of Middle-earth will continue passed down from one generation to the next.